On Tuesday, August 5th, 2008, a man stood at his arraignment. He was charged with attacking and cannibalizing another person. Some people who have studied the case say that he wasn't responsible for the killing because during the time of the attack, he was possessed by the Wendigo. It's the embodiment of starvation. Traditionally, it's been found in the barren wastelands of Canada, and it roams the hillsides looking for human flesh. Because it's so often described as physical, most people think of it as a beast or a yeti. But it's actually an evil spirit that possesses people. It slowly takes them over and then transforms them into something else.
Algonquian traditions indicate that some, if not most, giant Wendigos were once humans who were spiritually attacked, possessed, driven to madness, and then cannibalism. Once they had eaten human flesh, it began a metamorphosis into a literal monster. Thus, the Wendigo in its most monstrous form could be considered a late-stage Wendigo.
One of the ways that the spirit of the Wendigo infiltrates the mind is by simply getting a person to be aware of it. For example, hearing about it in a YouTube video like this one, or worse, sharing information about it on one's YouTube channel like we're doing now. See, the legend says that just learning that the Wendigo exists makes one susceptible and vulnerable to the possibility of possession, and then hearing stories about it, well, that makes it even worse. Just saying the word Wendigo or hearing it clearly pronounced is extremely dangerous. So I guess at this point, in order to be a responsible channel, we really should probably say, watch the rest of this video at your own risk. Legend has it that if the spirit of the Wendigo has control over a person long enough, that person actually physically transforms into something else.
The Windigo is gaunt to the point of emaciation. Its desiccated skin is pulled tightly over its pronounced bones. Its complexion is the ash gray of death, and its eyes are pushed back deep into their sockets. The Windigo looks like a gaunt skeleton that has been recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it has are tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from the suppuration of flesh, the Windigo gives off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption.
The word Wendigo is Algonquin, and it comes from the tribes of the Cree, Ojibwe, Naskapi, Innu, and the Saulteaux, and it means evil spirit. It's associated with winter, coldness, and starvation. Simultaneously, it's also oddly associated with gluttony, greed, and excess. Over the centuries, believe it or not, there have been hundreds of sightings and first-hand reports, making many wonder if the Wendigo is just folklore or something more.
We know that a sizable portion of Wendigo lore is rooted in reality. We can point to over 300 years of court transcripts, police records, journal entries, and other documents clearly describing first-hand accounts of unfortunate people going mad, claiming to be possessed by the Wendigo.
In this video, we're going to consider the possibility that the Wendigo just might exist. And to do this, we're going to take you on a journey sharing various Wendigo reports that have come in through the centuries. We'll first start with the legend of the Wendigo, and we'll culminate with the story of Vincent Li. Vincent Li was a man that, for all intents and purposes, was seemingly completely normal. And then one day, he just learned about the Wendigo. Shortly after that, he ate another person. Then stay with us for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, I'm going to give my thoughts on this case, and then Amy is going to come on, and she's going to share scientific evidence which shows that just thinking the wrong thoughts can be dangerous. So, this report begins somewhere in the frozen wilderness of Canada. It was cold, and the land was barren and frozen. The tracks in the snow went on for miles, and they belonged to a lonely hunter who had been searching for food for weeks. Then, on the verge of starvation, an evil spirit chanced upon him, and it began whispering in his ear, telling him that he had no other option but to kill and to eat another human being. At first, the thought repulsed him. Nevertheless, the whispers continued, and eventually he gave in, and he did exactly what the whispers told him to do. And when he did, this evil spirit splintered his mind. And this was the very first victim of the Windigo. Then, having tasted human flesh in this demented fashion, he was enticed to seek out more, and the more that he ate, the hungrier he became, until no amount of human flesh could satisfy him. Eventually, his hunger became so great that he actually chewed off his own lips, as he just couldn't resist having that flesh right there in his mouth without eating it. Over time, this evil spirit began morphing his body into a hideous creature that stood 2.5 times as tall as a normal man, with long bony limbs, and his teeth became jagged and razor-edged, completely exposed, of course, by the fact that he had already eaten off his own lips. He, or at this point, we should probably call it, developed super senses and super abilities so that it could see, hear, and smell better than any human and move at frightening speeds. Over time, its heart turned to ice, keeping it locked forever in the coldest regions of the world. And now it's generally found in the barren wastelands of Canada and Minnesota. And such is the legend of the Wendigo. Although no one can say for certain who exactly became the very first victim of the Wendigo, verbal descriptions like this one have been passed down for centuries. The first written account that we have comes to us from a Jesuit missionary who lived among the Algonquian people in the early 17th century.
I've been told that a creature called the Windigo had eaten some members of the tribes that live north of the river, and that the Windigo would have eaten a great many more of them if he hadn't been called elsewhere.
Since then, there have been countless reports of the Windigo, and this evil spirit is no respecter of persons. It possesses men and women.
A case of cannibalism reported from the Peace River country last summer turns out not to be caused by hunger, but the work of a woman who became Windigo several years ago and has since killed and eaten 12 persons, members of her own family and others. She was alive at last accounts from Edmonton. The natives in the area express surprise that the government does not arrest and punish her for her crime. March 16, 1888, the Fort Wayne Sentinel.
And the Windigo has been reported during recent times as well. One summer in the 1970s, a group of boys were playing baseball near a forested area in Minnesota. At one point, the ball was knocked into the woods, and a 13-year-old named Donald Kikagisic ran after it. According to Donald, as he bent down to pick up the ball, he saw 2 large grayish-white feet. He rose, and he found himself standing directly in front of some large unknown creature. Well, he of course ran back to the safety of his friends. And then, with a bravery that can only come with the inexperience of youth, all the kids ran back into the woods, trying to get a glimpse of whatever it was that Donald was screaming about.
Once inside the woods, the kids heard something big running, so they gave chase just as the creature crossed over a road. Now that the thing was out in the open, they were able to get a better look at the beast's physical appearance. Whatever it was big, at least 10 feet tall. It had pale white skin with some sort of dirty whitish hair covering its skinny, lanky body.
The boys continued to chase after it, but its much longer legs eventually outpaced theirs. In 1979, the Winnipeg Free Press shared an interview that it had with a lady named Annie Moose. She lived in the Nelson House area of Manitoba. She said that many years earlier, she saw what she believed was a Windigo near a place called Devil's Narrows. She said that she had been gathering wood near a body of water when she heard something in the trees.
A huge, horrible-looking Wendigo came out of the bush and headed for the children. That was the only Wendigo I ever saw. It was bigger than the biggest man. It had a terrible-looking face, all hair with no lips. It made an awful groaning kind of sound.
She immediately grabbed her children and rushed them to the boat.
I paddled away as hard as I could, while my husband stayed to drive the creature away. From out in the water, we could see the Wendigo waving a great big burning branch and setting fire to our camp. Finally, it moved on, but I can tell you it was very frightening, something you don't forget.
A few years later, in 1982, the Winnipeg Free Press shared another interview, this one with an 83-year-old trapper named Lionel Nicholas. He said that back in the 60s, he had a terrifying encounter with what he believed was a Wendigo.
It had hair that stood straight up, strange-looking lips, and eyeballs that kept rolling around. It looked bigger than the biggest man I've ever seen. It was very frightening. I've heard stories of them wiping out whole settlements in the past, but I never actually saw anyone get killed or hurt.
All of the accounts that we've shared so far date back to the 1970s or earlier. Surely there aren't any modern cases of the Wendigo, or are there? In the fall of 2018, the Windigo researcher, author, and lecturer Chad Lewis went to the North Woods of Wisconsin to interview two teenage brothers, Justice and John. They believed that they had encountered a Wendigo during summer camp in 2016.
The old rustic summer camp is located a few miles north of the town of Spooner, Wisconsin. Positioned deep in the woods, the camp's sparse buildings and dilapidated-looking cabins stick out from the landscape, appearing like a strange lumberjack camp from the 1920s that time had forgotten.
Lewis described the area as having a dark, evil creepiness about it, and he even wondered why any modern-day parent would send their children to such a place.
The entire camp layout looked like some discarded horror movie set.
One night, the older brother, Justice, was in his cabin playing cards with a buddy when he suddenly caught a glimpse of what he first thought was a couple of moths just outside the window. But when he looked closer, he saw that what he first thought were moths were actually the eyes of a strange creature that appeared to be hunched over and peering through the window. Justice said that he stared at the creature for about 5 seconds or so before it ran off. Then, the next night, his younger brother, John, ran into what appeared to be the very same creature.
When John and his friend at first approached, the bone-thin creature appeared to be bracing itself against a tree. But when the twosome walked a bit closer, the thing removed its hand from the tree and became very agitated. Petrified, intimidated, fearing that the beast was out for blood, John and his friend instinctively started backing away from the monster, only to discover that the beast was now moving toward them.
John immediately ran and told the camp counselors, and the counselors started searching the area, half thinking that they might find a psychotic person or maybe a rabid animal or something like that. But what they found was something else.
Within a few minutes, they caught a fleeting glimpse of something off in the distance, but it quickly ducked deeper into the woods before they could make out what it was. Much to their credit, the counselors took the sighting seriously and immediately implemented a buddy policy, whereby anyone going outside had to have a partner with them.
When the brothers returned home, they immediately started searching online, trying to figure out what it was that they saw. And eventually, they came across the Windigo. And even though they had never seen the Windigo before, they both believed that that was exactly what they had encountered that night. If Justice and John truly did see a Windigo, well, then they were fortunate to have gotten away. Perhaps, had John and his friend lingered just a few more moments, John might not have been around to tell his story. Supposedly, as we shared, the Wendigo starts out as a man who, for whatever reason, becomes possessed by an evil spirit and then eats people. Could that be what happened to Vincent Li? Vincent Li was born in Dandong, China on April 30th, 1968. And as far as we can tell, he had a pretty normal childhood. He graduated from the University of Wuhan's Institute of Technology with a Bachelor's of Science Computing in 1992. And in 2001, he immigrated to Canada, and he became a Canadian citizen in 2005. He worked as a caretaker for the local church, and the pastor of that church, a man named Tom Castor, said that for the entire time that Vincent worked there, he never showed any sign of anger or emotional problems of any type. Along with taking care of the grounds of the church, Vincent also delivered newspapers for the Edmonton Sun, which might have been the reason for his downfall. You see, on July 20th, 2008, The Sun printed an article titled Evil Spirit. It was written by a man named Andrew Hannon. Hannon interviewed Nathan Carlson. Nathan Carlson is a historian, and he is one of the world's leading experts on the Windigo. The article was about a Canadian native named Swiftrunner, who became possessed by the Windigo and then turned into a cannibalistic monster. Rumor has it that Nathan Carlson was a bit reluctant to give the interview, believing that by doing so, he just might be opening Pandora's box and inviting this Wendigo spirit into the mind of some unfortunate soul. Remember, just learning about the Wendigo can put a person at risk for this. Well, Vincent delivered hundreds of copies of this article on July 20th, 2008, and that's when things began to get weird. Some people believe that at some point during these deliveries, Vincent started acting extremely strangely. Others say that there was no strange behavior at all from Vincent that day, and any reports of such are just rumors. In any case, exactly 10 days later, Vincent would be arrested for cannibalism. At precisely 12:01 a.m. on July 30th, 2008, just 10 days after Vincent delivered those newspapers containing the article of the Windigo, a carnival worker named Tim McLean got on board Greyhound Bus 1170, departing Edmonton and heading to Winnipeg. McLean was returning home after a long stretch of working at different locations for the carnival. A few hours later, the sun rose, traveled across the sky, and then began to set again. And at 6:55 p.m., the bus stopped in Erickson, Manitoba, where it picked up Vincent Li, the man that we introduced in the last segment. Vincent sat in the front of the bus, and the bus continued on its journey. Then a short while later, the bus made a scheduled rest stop. Everyone got off the bus and walked around and stretched their legs. And it's not clear if Tim McLean and Vincent Li struck up a conversation during the stop, or if Vincent just randomly changed seats when he got back onto the bus. But after the rest stop was over, Vincent moved from the front of the bus, where he had been sitting, to the back of the bus, where Tim McLean was sitting. Vincent took the seat right next to Tim's, and witnesses said that after the two had a quick exchange of words, Tim put on some headphones, leaned against the window, and fell asleep. Then sometime between 8 and 8:30, for reasons that have never been figured out, Vincent just stood up and looked at Tim. Then he pulled out a large hunting knife and stabbed him while he slept, repeatedly. Well, this, of course, caused a loud commotion, and many of the passengers turned around to see what was going on. The sight was traumatizing, and just about everyone headed for the front of the bus. The bus driver looked into the rearview mirror and couldn't believe what he was seeing. So he immediately pulled the bus to the side of the road and opened the doors, letting all the passengers off. Meanwhile, two very brave souls made an attempt to help Tim. Later, they said that Vincent was like a crazed animal, swinging the knife wildly. And at one point, they could tell that Tim was already dead. So they too exited the bus, leaving only Vincent and Tim inside. Then, and this is horrible, and we're deliberately not going to show you any graphics for this part, but Vincent actually pulled out a pair of scissors and he used them to cut off various body parts. And just like in the fashion of the Wendigo, he consumed them. Shortly after this, he used that large hunting knife and completely severed Tim's head. Many people in the crowd watching from the outside of the bus said that Vincent looked demented, like he truly was possessed by an evil spirit.
I heard a blood-curdling scream, and I turned around, and the guy sitting directly behind me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a big Rambo knife, right in the throat, repeatedly. Later, while standing outside, I got sick after I saw the head thing. Some people were puking, some were crying, some were shocked. The guy just looked at us and dropped Tim's head on the ground, totally calm.
Crazy story, isn't it? At 8:30 p.m., the Royal Canadian Mounted Police got the call, and they dispatched units right away. When they arrived, they found that Vincent was barricaded inside the bus. After everyone had exited, they made sure that Vincent wasn't coming out. The police tried to speak with Vincent. They demanded that he toss out the knife and any other dangerous items, but Vincent acted as if the police weren't even there, and he just continued with Tim's body. This event was so traumatic that many of those present later said that they had to get counseling. And we're not going to go into everything that Vincent did. It's just too much. But if you really want to know the details, we'll leave a link in the description. About 1:20 a.m. on July 31st, Vincent busted a window in the back of the bus. He threw out some personal belongings, the knife, and the pair of scissors. Then he dove out of the bus head first, landing on his head. And check this out. He immediately jumped to his feet, completely unaffected, seemingly having developed superhuman endurance. Well, the police worked to subdue him, but he was nearly impossible to take control of. Later, they said that they had to stun him 3 times, and it was like he was a wild animal. Finally, they were able to cuff him and bring him in. But it's what he said during his arraignment that made several Wendigo experts wonder if he truly had been possessed by the Wendigo. Vincent was arraigned on August 5th, 2008, and although his lawyer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, Vincent himself only said 3 words: "Please kill me." The interesting thing about that is, according to Wendigo lore, people who are possessed by the Wendigo make that exact plea once they are captured during moments of lucidity. Well, the trial commenced on March 3rd, 2009. During the trial, experts came forward testifying that Vincent was not responsible for the murder. Even though he didn't have a history of mental illness, they argued that he had heard a supernatural voice coming out of the air, telling him to kill Tim McLean. The voice said that his own life was in danger because Tim was going to kill him. Vincent then, of course, acted in self-defense, killing Tim first. The voice then said that if Vincent didn't eat Tim, Tim was going to come back to life. So that's when Vincent started cannibalizing Tim. Believe it or not, the judge agreed with this defense, and he ordered that Vincent be turned over to Manitoba's Selkirk Mental Health Center and treated for schizophrenia. His treatment lasted for just under a decade. And then, in 2017, just shy of 10 years from the date of this horrific incident, Vincent received a complete discharge and was released back into society. So, did the spirit of the Wendigo possess Vincent Li? Well, of course not. At least that's what the experts say. They believe that although for his entire life, 4 solid decades, he had had no history of mental illness, Vincent was suffering from a legitimate case of schizophrenia during the incident. But educated experts of the Wendigo seem as if they just might disagree. On Monday, August 11th, 2008, Andrew Hannon, remember him? He was the reporter who had interviewed Nathan Carlson, wrote that article about the Wendigo and Swift Runner just 10 days before this horrific event. He wrote this.
Nathan Carlson has barely slept since July 30th. He says that ever since it happened, he hasn't been able to get it out of his head. The Edmonton ethno-historian is one of the world's leading experts on Wendigo phenomenon, and the recent horrific beheading and alleged cannibalism on a Greyhound bus bound for Winnipeg from Edmonton rocks him to his very core. As the grisly details of Tim McLean's last moments on Earth came to light in the following days, Carlson sank deeper and deeper into a fog of horror and revulsion.
Just about all of the experts who believe in this Wendigo spirit agree that simply saying the word Wendigo puts a person in its radar. Amy did some digging, and she found out that there's actual evidence that even thinking the wrong things can and does have a negative effect on people. So I'm excited today because you're going to talk about how just thinking the wrong stuff can negatively affect one's world. What?
Yeah. Think about it. There are these motivational speakers. I mean, some super highly respected, Anthony Robbins, I think, is one. Les Brown is another. They have been saying for years that there is power in positive thinking.
Right.
Well, I feel like science now is kind of like, there's something to that. The reason I say that is I came across some studies. One of them was relating to negative thoughts. They switched it to negative thinking and heart disease. Negative thoughts can actually increase your chance of getting heart disease.
Really?
Or if you already have heart disease, it can make it worse.
So what do you mean negative thoughts? Like,
negative thoughts, like one term they use is called rumination, where you're constantly thinking about past things. I did this wrong. I should have done that. Why didn't I go to college? And then other things like, I'm so stupid. I'm never going to graduate. I'm never going to get this.
So I think we've known that forever, and scientists is just now finally catching up with what the world knows.
The study that I found most fascinating was a study on the relationship between, they call it repetitive negative thinking, RNT. They found that it absolutely has an effect on your brain.
Okay.
That it actually increases, this is really scary, increases cognitive decline. So you actually start declining more if you think negatively, if you have these bad, harmful thoughts about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also increases your chance of Alzheimer's.
Really?
Yes. And they found that there are 2 proteins that are key factors in getting Alzheimer's, 2 proteins in the brain, amyloid and tau.
Okay.
And they have found that people who have these negative thoughts constantly, actually, those proteins increase in the brain, and they're not good.
I wonder if you could eliminate negative thoughts, if you could live forever.
You maybe just unlocked the fountain of youth right there. It's
Yeah.
like positive thoughts all the time.
Yeah, no negative thoughts.
Right. And what these studies were saying, that it is this repetitiveness of these negative thoughts. Like you're constantly, you can never say, oh, wow, I have a half a glass. But that makes me think about all of the studies Dean Radin has done.
So what is his take on this?
So his take is our thoughts can shape our reality, which is very, very powerful, right?
Yes.
Because then couldn't they shape our health as well, is what I'm wondering?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'll go back just to our thoughts shape reality. Now, in his book, Real Magic, he lists, I believe it's 6 scientific studies that he has done, that others have done over years and years, right? It's not like just a quick one and done, that he claims those studies show that our thoughts can shape our reality. And he says that all of those studies have what they call in mathematics a 6 sigma, which means that the chances of those studies being wrong, like, well, yeah, but maybe it's just chance, he said, are over 1 billion to 1.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's so much evidence right there. I saw an interview with him once. He had this almost drop the mic moment, like, with all of this evidence, we should be done.
Yeah.
We should know about the power of the mind now. We should just know that it is a real thing.
So I got to ask you about this, like I always do then.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about, well, 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
One, the overall idea of the Windigo.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe it's possible that something like that can exist? And number 2, what about Vincent Li?
Mm-hmm. So I think that there is something to the Wendigo. I don't know if it is maybe interdimensional type of creature or something. I've also wondered, is it something like a Bigfoot, like an actual creature that makes its way into our dimension and out of our dimension, but different than Bigfoot? This one is very much more scary. I mean, it's terrifying. Yeah, thinking about that.
And what are your thoughts on Vincent Li?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened. What I found most interesting about it was that Nathan Carlson really kind of just disappeared after this. You know, he publishes this really long research paper. He does all this research. I watched interviews with him, and then he kind of just disappears. It's like it affected him, so massively. It really felt like maybe I never should have written this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I don't know. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
For those of you who regularly follow this channel, you know that I would never do anything if I thought that it would put Amy in any type of danger. So, of course, I personally don't believe that the Wendigo spirit can get me just because I share information about it or because I correctly pronounce the word Wendigo. But could there be a spirit like the Wendigo? One that takes over a human and transforms that person into something else? The story reminds me of the William Ramsey case. He's a man who claimed that for decades he was possessed by the spirit of a wolf. He would often well up with an insatiable urge to rip people apart and bite into their flesh. It's an interesting story because on more than one occasion, witnesses claimed that they saw him transforming into something else. We did a complete report on the case, and if you'd like to see it, it's here.
Yeah, I know, I know you know.
Yes, but do they know?
They know we love them. We tell them all the time. Not enough, though.
And there's another video next week.
What?